At the end of the 18th century, the most glorious kingdom in Europe would face a mighty foe, the power of its own people. One man would rise to inspire the nation to cast aside a reluctant king and a hated queen. And a new republic would be born in blood, the blood of the French Revolution. No one could have foreseen the turbulent times ahead on one spring day in 1770. The Chateau of Versailles is packed to its gilded rafters with the glittering crowds of the royal court. Completed in 1682, Versailles was the vision of King Louis XIV. To put some distance between himself and his subjects, Louis XIV removed himself from Paris and established a new residence at this small town 12 miles west of the capital. Here he ordered the construction of the most magnificent palace in Europe. For nearly 100 years, it has been the seat of the nation's unwavering monarchy. Today, it is host to a very important wedding. King Louis XV's grandson, Prince Louis Capet, next in line to the throne, is about to take a bride. Just 15 years old on the eve of his wedding, Louis Capet is bashful and hesitant, with few of the characteristics expected of a future king.
Louis was this pudgy, shy, painfully inadequate 15-year-old with absolutely no social graces at all. Louis XV's mistress, Madame du Barry, called him a fat, ill-bred boy. Basically, he was just a schlub.
It was very hard for Louis to come to decisions. He dithered incessantly. He was always ready to be persuaded by the last person he had talked to. Again, those are usually not considered good leadership qualities.
Louis's marriage is a political union between Austria's royal family, the Habsburgs, and his own, the Bourbons. The wedding symbolizes the end of an ancient rivalry and the birth of new alliances. The young bride-to-be arrives in France, a wide-eyed and pretty 14-year-old girl, Marie Antoinette.
Marie Antoinette is an Archduchess of Austria. She's the youngest daughter of the Empress Maria Theresa. And she comes to France as part of a marriage deal which represents a great reversal of alliances, whereby for the first time in living memory, France and Austria become allies rather than enemies.
Marie Antoinette comes to France as a political gesture, but as a teenager, she has little interest in political affairs.
Well, when Marie Antoinette came to Versailles, she was very young. She didn't know a great deal about the country she was coming to. She didn't know about the customs. She didn't know about the court. She was certainly a headstrong girl, a very lively girl, but she was still a girl.
When Marie Antoinette comes to Versailles, she is just a teenager. She is 14 years old, blonde, with blue eyes. She is pretty. She likes being attractive to people, and she comes with the intention of winning over her husband and her new family.
On the night of the wedding, there is an ominous storm. But inside, the grandeur of the ceremony lights up the palace as the newlyweds make their way to the royal bedroom. In a ceremony that symbolically ensures the conception of an heir, the king's courtiers are present as the awkward young couple is presented in the marriage bed for the first time. The crowd is delighted and expectations are high. But once the curtains are drawn, it's clear that an heir will not be so easily produced.
Louis was not only not interested in ruling, Louis wasn't particularly interested in loving either, and he paid her no attention on the first nights or even further into their marriage.
Many years will pass before the marriage is finally consummated. The lack of an heir will soon spark gossip across the kingdom that will plague the couple for years to come. The grand wedding gala continues for days. But outside Versailles, there is less cause for celebration. Years of neglect by a royal government have left the French people deprived and hungry. 7 years earlier, Louis XV had lost the 7 Years' War, in which Britain had relieved France of most of her North American colonies. The ill-fated contest nearly bankrupted the country. France's coffers were nearly empty, even though its population was growing bigger every day. With diseases like the plague a distant memory, fewer people were dying, but more and more were hungry.
France grew from 20 million to 26 million in the 18th century after having grown only 1 million in the preceding 2 centuries. That put tremendous strain on what was there, and so there was a lot of anxiety.
4 years after the royal wedding, Prince Louis's grandfather, Louis XV, loses his final battle with smallpox. The king dies defeated and unpopular, and leaves behind a country on the brink of chaos. In a lavish ceremony, young Prince Louis ascends to the throne and is crowned King Louis XVI. Despite the grandeur of his coronation, Louis is aware that he is woefully unprepared for the job.
Louis XVI, the moment his grandfather dies and it suddenly is clear that he's king, he doesn't know what to do. He feels as if the world is falling in upon him. So although he's been educated in the full expectation of becoming king, he doesn't feel ready for it.
For a kingdom in crisis, Louis XVI is not the ideal pilot. The 20-year-old king prays, "Protect us, Lord, for we reign too young." Ensconced in their royal apartments in Versailles, Louis and Marie Antoinette begin their new lives as young monarchs. While only 12 miles away in Paris, another new era is flourishing. One that is on a collision course with the monarchy itself. It is a dangerous new age of ideas. The age of enlightenment. As the royal carriage approaches the prestigious Louis le Grand College in Paris, the crowds gather for a glimpse of pomp and celebrity. The newly crowned King Louis XVI and his young wife are being welcomed to Paris. At the head of the welcome party is a promising young law student, Maximilien Robespierre.
When Robespierre was a schoolboy, the king visited the college and Robespierre gave a Latin address to the king. So he actually spoke to Louis XVI when he was a teenager.
As Robespierre respectfully delivers his Latin soliloquy, the king hardly notices the boy. But years later, their fates will again intertwine under very different circumstances.
It was one of these rituals that take place in every school, and yet, of course, it was so charged with irony, because here you had the young Robespierre reading this discourse in honor of the man he would later kill.
For now, the welcome is warm and the flattery effusive. But although the grandeur of the monarchy can still excite adulation and loyalty, parts of French society are beginning to question its role. Since the Middle Ages, French society had been divided into 3 classes, or estates, dictated by birth. There was a vast gap between the wealth of the first 2 estates, the nobility and the clergy, and the rest of France. To see Enlightenment ideals in action, one has only to look across the Atlantic, where the Americans struggle for independence from France's nemesis, Great Britain. King Louis wants revenge for his grandfather's defeats, and sees an opportunity in the American War of Independence. French military intervention costs the country 1,500 million livres, money raised from borrowing and taxing poverty-struck peasants. The enormous bill hastens an impending financial crisis.
America bankrupts France, in effect. because the debt which the French monarchy incurs in order to fight the American War of Independence turns out to be absolutely crucial in the financial situation of the French monarchy, because the French monarchy cannot pay those debts.
As Louis sends money and troops across the Atlantic, Marie Antoinette is busy incurring debts of her own. Life at Versailles is a never-ending cycle of archaic ritual and formality. There are ceremonies for the waking of the king and queen, for dressing, for dining, for retiring to bed. To keep herself amused amidst the drudgery of ritual, Marie presides over a parade of increasingly outrageous fashion.
Marie was obsessed with fashion, especially these towering hairdos that were several feet high, that took hours and hours in the construction and fit all sorts of ornaments and fruits, and to many people they seemed like an obscenity. They came to represent what was all that was wrong with her and with Versailles and that culture.
Marie occupies herself with court gossip, gambling, and the staging of plays. As her expenses accumulate, Marie earns herself a nickname.
Marie is given the name Madame Deficit as the country is in economic chaos, and she continues to spend as if nothing's happened on dresses and jewels and shoes, and she was the Imelda Marcos of her day.
In the popular mind, there is perhaps one way in which Marie Antoinette can repay the debt. In the 7 years since their marriage, Louis and Marie have yet to produce a child. Marie was finding herself in an increasingly precarious position.
The job of the Queen is to produce a male heir. It's absolutely essential for there to be a son. And during that time, people criticize, people are dissatisfied, people say the king should never have married this Austrian archduchess, and now she can't even produce an heir to the throne.
Marie is desperate. Louis's appetite for food is unquestioned, but sex is clearly not on the menu.
Maria Therese, the mother of Marie Antoinette, questioned, if a girl as gorgeous as my daughter cannot get him going, then what's going on?
Louis XVI and his young wife were not able to conceive for 7 years. This cast a pall on the beginning of his reign, and because his hobby as a locksmith was well known, there were all sorts of salacious songs circulating to the effect that the locksmith was having a hard time finding the keyhole.
Louis's apparent lack of virility is seen as symptomatic of a weak king. After years of frustration and mounting pressure, Louis is diagnosed with a treatable condition called phimosis.
Louis had a deformity that made arousal extremely painful. Therefore, there was no consummation until there was a surgical procedure that could correct this. But he was scared to death to have it, and it took years for him to agree to have it. And when he finally did, voila.
After a simple surgery, the couple is able to have their first child, Marie Therese. But there is no easy fix for the years of damage to Marie Antoinette's image. Since the early 1780s, libelles have circulated throughout the country. Pornographic satire of the king and queen. Obscene pamphlets mock Louis's impotence and portray Marie as a promiscuous harlot in a debauched and decadent court. The people's views on the monarchy are turning sour as the situation in the countryside worsens. There is a run of bad harvests, and attempts at deregulation only make things worse. As the cost of flour rises, there is a shortage of the very heart of the French diet, bread. But the hardships naturally stop at the gates of Versailles. As the court continue to live in extravagance, grievances are committed to paper. One charge is leveled directly at the royal court. "Do you know why there are so many needy people?" it cried. "It is because your luxurious existence devours in one day the substance of 1,000 men." The man behind this charge is the same young man who, only a few years earlier, had eulogized the royal couple after their coronation. Maximilien Robespierre. His voice is just one amongst a growing clamor for change, for equality, and for revolution.